Hola a todos. This will be a lesson about when to use the imperfecto tense in Spanish and when to use the pretérito. We already learned these two different past tenses now. The pretérito, the preterite tense, is the ones that you see the endings on the screen here. For example, words like caminé, comimos, fuiste, tuvimos. It's got the AR endings, the ER-IR endings, and lots of different irregulars. I just put a few of the examples up here on the screen for you. The imperfecto is the one we just learned, and it has also its own set of AR and ER-IR verb endings, but there's only 3 irregulars, which is nice. So some examples of verbs in the imperfecto are verbs like hablaba, comían, era, íbamos are some examples of imperfecto verbs. And I put them in red and green on purpose on the screen here because we're going to use those colors to sort of help us remember the uses of the preterito and the imperfecto. We're going to say that the color red is for stop, right? Like a stop sign. So we're going to use the preterite, the red one, for a one-time completed event. Think of a stop sign. We're also going to use it for a series of consecutive events that possibly, for example, took place in a short time span. For example, today I woke up, I brushed my teeth, I got dressed, then I ate breakfast. These are a series of consecutive events and possibly short in duration. I'm going to use the preterite for that. And I'm going to use green to describe the imperfecto because green is for go. So green is for an ongoing event, something that might have taken place over a long period of time. And I can use the preterite, the red, for any interruptions. Here's another picture of that. Imagine for the imperfecto has to be for something that took place over a longer period of time in your story that you're telling. So for example, when I was little, when I was a child. I mean, that is a long time in my life. Cuando era niña, cuando era pequeña. I'm going to use imperfecto. But the pretérito are going to be for those one-time events on the timeline of my life. When I was little, I got my first bike when I was 7 years old. My sister was born when I was 10 years old. I went to middle school when I was 11 years old. So those would be in the preterite, the red ones, the one-time events. To review, when do you use the imperfect tense? To say the background information in your story. For repetitive actions in the past, something that you always used to do. You always used to watch SpongeBob SquarePants. For telling time, we're going to say eran las 5. It was 5 o'clock. And for saying how old someone was. When I was 5 years old, cuando yo tenía 5 años. And the preterite, the one that we learned at the beginning of the year, the red one, is used for something that happened one time in the past, something that happened suddenly, was an interruption in that long green squiggly line, for specific events in the story, or for something that happened in one moment and then it was finished. It is a completed action. These are some different uses of that past tense. We also have this mnemonic device of chatted to help us remember some of the uses of the imperfecto. So I put it in green here. The C is for background conditions. The H is for habitual repeated actions. The A is for age. The TT is for telling time. The E is for emotion. Again, most of the time, for how you were feeling all day long. And D for a description. Now, some of these rules are not hard and fast rules, but in general, especially when we're beginners, they can help us remember when to use the imperfecto. Okay, a little bit more of like drawings. So the imperfecto we said was the green one. For 2 events that are happening at the same time for a long period of time, I'm going to use 2 imperfecto verbs, 2 green ones. While the teacher was teaching, I was sleeping the whole class. It was boring. La profesora enseñaba, yo dormía. If there's an interruption, I'm going to put that one in red. I was sleeping, yo dormía. for the whole class. But the teacher asked me a question. La profesora me hizo una pregunta. That was an interruption in my nap. Here's another one. The teacher was talking. La profesora hablaba. I fell asleep. Yo me dormí. When you use dormir in the reflexive, it means I fell asleep. She was talking, and then right there at that moment, I fell asleep. And I'm going to use two preterite verbs when it's not an interruption, and neither of them was taking place for a long period of time. They're consecutive. La profesora me hizo una pregunta. The teacher asked me a question. Yo contesté la pregunta. I answered the question. Finally, we can use signal words when we're reading a passage and we are trying to figure out which verb to use, or if we want to express ourselves in Spanish. If we think of some different signal words, it will help us figure out which tense we should use. The one-time events, the preterite, the red ones, or the ongoing events, the imperfecto, the green ones. And if you use your common sense, it kind of makes a little bit of sense to you, because, for example, the phrase por lo general means generally. So I'm going to say, generally, I liked cheese, except for I didn't like one type, blue cheese. Generally, this is something that was taking place over a longer period of time, maybe even in the past when you were a child. We're going to use for this one, imperfecto. You see the word todos los días, which means every day. Well, if it happened every day, it was a repeated habitual event. It was a green, squiggly, ongoing line. That's imperfecto. If you see the word típicamente, típicamente means typically. Typically, I would go to school at 7:30 a.m. every day, typically. That's also going to be imperfecto, repeated habitual event. Ayer. Ayer means yesterday. There's no other signal words in the sentence. This is likely a sentence about a one-time event. Like yesterday, I went to the grocery store. We're going to use preterite. Ayer fui al supermercado. De pronto means all of a sudden, suddenly. Think now of your green squiggly line with a red dot on it as an interruption. I was sleeping, man. But then suddenly, de pronto, the teacher asked me a question. That suddenly is an interruption. I have to use the red, the preterite, the pretérito for those ones. Mientras. Mientras means while, like meanwhile, mientras. And think about this. If you use mientras, again, it's a green squiggly line. While I was sleeping, the class took a test. While I was sleeping, that is the background information. It's the green squiggly line part. It's what was happening in the background. It happened during the whole entire class period. I'm going to use imperfecto, the green one. Siempre. Do you remember what this word means? Siempre means always. Well, if it always happened, it means it happened repeatedly in the past, many times. For things that happened many times in the past or over a long period of time, I want to use imperfecto for that one. Anteayer. This word means the day before yesterday. Similar to ayer, yesterday, if this is my only signal word, no other information, not saying that it was about the weather or a description or anything else, I'm going to go with probably preterito for that one. Let's just do one more. Generalmente means generally. And generally, if something happened generally, it means it happened many times in the past. I'm going to use imperfecto for that one. So I hope that this video helped you get a little bit of a background for when to use imperfecto and when to use preterito. And I'll have some other videos for you about practicing using imperfecto and preterito.